PFA fam, what is up? What is happening? Hope everybody had a good week 13. Sadly, we had some pretty significant injuries today, so we'll get into that. We'll discuss it. But first off, let's just get right into it. We only have two teams on bye week 14, which is a positive. The Commanders and Cardinals. So other than that, we will be full go with everything else. So and then after that, no more buys. So obviously, this is the last week for most people until the fantasy playoffs start next on week 15. So so people are going to be definitely needing a dub. If not, this is a good time, especially if you're a team that's like locked in to a bye or something like that, or locked into the playoffs. Start really stashing some players that could really benefit you in the fantasy playoffs. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start with the quarterback position. Start off with Josh Dobbs. I was actually surprised. He was only rostered in 45% of leagues. Week 13, obviously they're on bye, but Justin Jefferson will also be back. Raiders have allowed the 14th most fantasy point or the 14th most passing yards and touchdowns. While Dobbs has struggled recently, he has shown the ability to utilize his legs, which obviously lifts his floor. Next up is Gardner Minshew, rostered in 23% of leagues. Minshew had one of his best days today, completing 26 of 42 for 312 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is good for 20 plus fantasy points. Next up is a decent matchup against the Bengals, who have allowed the 12th most fantasy points to the position. After that, you have Matthew Stafford. Stafford is starting to cook with back-to-back 22-plus fantasy point performances today against the Browns. He completed 22 of 37 for 279 yards and 3 scores. He's averaging about 250 passing yards and 3.5 touchdowns over his last 2 starts. Next week is a much tougher matchup, though, against the Ravens on the road. And then I think I've said this a lot, we've made this statement a lot. I did not have Joe Flacco on my fantasy football bingo card this year, but here we are. 2% roster, 39-year-old Joe Flacco came off the bench and tossed 254 yards and 2 scores for 17 fantasy points. It's not even really an overreaction to say that Flacco kind of looked like the best quarterback the Browns have had this season. He will take on a Jags defense this next week that has allowed the 7th most passing yards and touchdowns and have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to the position. So here we are, Joe Flacco. Not something I would have thought we were going to talk about, but this is where we're at this season. Lastly, it's just Jameis Winston. Derek Carr left with a concussion and a back injury today against the Lions. The gunslinging Winston will now take over and face the Panthers. Now, this isn't a great matchup. The Panthers have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, though they did give up quite a bit to Baker Mayfield and the Bucs today. But Jameis Winston looks to be in line to start this week for the Saints. But again, not the best matchup. And then Desmond Ridder, if you're desperate, you could look to do that as well. So.
Going to move it over to the running backs for week 14. For me, if I need someone just as a spot start for this week, I am looking at Tyjae Spears as my top added running back for the week. We did see Derrick Henry leave with a concussion. He does have the extra day. They play on Monday night. And we've seen Chris Olave, Brock Purdy, both those guys cleared the concussion protocol in the same week in which they got the concussion. So there's a chance that Derrick Henry is able to make it back. But regardless, they're going to be going up against the Dolphins in this one. We've already seen situations earlier this year where when the Titans are trailing, like they'll basically just put Derrick Henry on the bench, like especially if they're down, double digit points or what have you. So Tyjae Spears is one, like if I have to make it to the playoffs, I think he's the one I want to add. He's not as widely available. He was hovering right underneath 40% rostership in ESPN leagues. The other guy you can look at to pick up and potentially just rock with the rest of the season is going to be Roschon Johnson. Kev, you were saying that he was rostered in about 20% of Yahoo leagues. It was around 30% on ESPN leagues, which is kind of interesting considering the last time we saw them play. Roschon Johnson handled 15 opportunities on 74% of the snaps compared to just 8 opportunities and 21% snap share for Khalil Herbert. So if that were to continue, Roschon's going to be a great pickup. I think one of the reasons why I put Tyjae over Roschon strictly for week 14 is we obviously that last game with Roschon where he saw that massive opportunity share and the snap share was also without Deonta Foreman. He has been good this year, so I think there is a chance that we kind of see a 3-headed approach, like a hot hand type of approach. But I think Roschon Johnson probably makes the most sense in terms of someone who you can just pick up and hold the rest of the season. Dearness Johnson, I definitely want to pick up. Now we have Travis Etienne, excuse me. We have Etienne banged up with a rib injury. We've already seen Etienne's snap share and usage start to come down. Really hasn't been that efficient. It's been Dearness Johnson who's kind of given that offensive spark in terms of the backfield. So I'm putting him here up in the ads rather than just the handcuff plus or the handcuff area. Keaton Mitchell around that 30%. Maybe he got dropped during bye week. So if he's out there, I'm definitely picking him up. The Washington running backs to mention here, we saw Brian Robinson leave with an injury. According to some of the Twitter doctors, looks like this could be a multi-week hamstring injury. Obviously, Chris Rodriguez is going to be a little bit more, or he's going to be a lot more available than Antonio Gibson. But I think both those guys could potentially be pickups. But obviously, that one is only if you already have a spot locked up. Like if I need to get into the playoffs with the Commanders coming up on bye, I'm not really looking to add either of them. Like none of them really excite me all that much. But if Robinson ends up missing week 15, I think we see a split backfield here. Doesn't really seem like the Commanders want to give Antonio Gibson a workhorse type of role. So I think Chris Rodriguez will be involved. So for those of you in deeper leagues, you can look at him. And then we also had an injury to Ramondre Stevenson. Kind of seems like this one could be a severe high ankle injury. So it looks like we're going to be without him probably for the rest of the fantasy season. I really don't know. I don't know what to do here. Ezekiel Elliott was rostered only in 34% of ESPN leagues. I do think he ends up seeing the majority of the work here. But if they were to trail in their upcoming matchup, then I think you could potentially look to Ty Montgomery or JaMycal Hasty. I think they potentially become interesting, but we did have Hasty as a healthy scratch today. And this game in general just looks absolutely gross with the Patriots taking on the Steelers, which likely going to be Mitchell Trubisky in that one on Thursday night. And right now we have a point total of 34 in the early opening lines for that one. So again, like I'd much rather have Tyjae Spears, Roshan Johnson, Keaton Mitchell than any of these Patriots running backs. And then just moving on to some of the guys in the handcuff plus and handcuff territory. Kenneth Gainwell should be rostered, Ty Chandler as well, and then Michael Carter. We did see Amari DiMercado leave with a neck injury, and I wouldn't expect the Cardinals to be playing with a lead much more going forward. So I do think we could see Carter get some more looks down the stretch. And then your handcuffs, Samaje Perine, Rico Dowdle, Eli Mitchell, Chase Edmonds. The Atlanta running backs, I did think it was interesting today that Cordell Patterson played 10 more snaps than Tyler Algier. Obviously, CPAT is going to be more widely available, so I think he's an interesting stash in deeper leagues. And then Royce Freeman in the cuff as well. And then you can just ignore the injury watch. I thought I deleted that, but I did not.
I think the only one you could probably look to is maybe monitor the situation of DeAndre Swift, because that dude got absolutely laid out at the end of the game of that one and got taken out. So, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be anything to come of that, but that is certainly something we should monitor because in that 49ers game, he got his head taken off. So,
For sure.
anyways, let's keep it moving and move over to the wide receivers. Now, we talked about our major injury, and the one was Tank Dell. Hate to see it. A fractured fibula for him. He is obviously done for the year on this one. And so Noah Brown, who's only rostered in 40% of leagues, becomes very, very attractive. We have seen we have seen Brown have monster games in weeks 9 and 10 when either Nico or Tank miss. So the upside is certainly there. He becomes probably the number 2 option here within this offense. So he becomes a must-add option moving forward with Tank Dell obviously done for the year with that injury, and then obviously Nico Collins' value just skyrockets. So after that, it is Elijah Moore, who is 42% rostered. It wasn't the most efficient day after being targeted 12 times, but he did turn that into 4 catches for 83 yards. Good for 12 PPR points. We also saw Amari Cooper leave with a concussion. Next up is a matchup against the Jaguars, who have allowed the 8th most PPR points to the position. So if he was to miss, then Elijah Moore is obviously a must-add for this week. And then I think you might be able to look at somebody like Cedric Tillman or something like that as another option as well. But that's we'll have to wait and see on Amari Cooper's status after that. And then I put Michael Wilson on here, which I put him on here, I think, every single week of the season. But the Cardinals have a bye week this upcoming week, obviously, but we should see Michael Wilson turn in the fantasy playoffs in week 15. Kyler's been playing really well since coming off the IR, and with Hollywood struggling, Wilson could have a big impact once he returns. And he looked like the best wide receiver they had prior to the injury he suffered. So Michael Wilson should be ready to go after the bye. And then Curtis Samuel, he's obviously on bye this week as well, but he caught 4 or 5 for 65 yards. He has now posted back-to-back double-digit performances. Right now, to close out the season, though, they face the Rams, the Jets, and the 49ers, which is pretty rough way to close out the season. Not something that I'm definitely looking at here, but Curtis Samuel, at least in PPR formats, I think you look there. And then Demario Douglas also missed week 13 with concussion. We will have to see if he's going to be able to make it back because they do play Thursday night. But if he is, he's their only playmaker they really have on offense. So and PPR formats again. I even know if I would be as excited about him in a half point PPR, but in full point PPR, I think he's another decent look. And then from there, you have Jonathan Mingo, the rookie wide receiver, is starting to become more involved in the offense, seeing 10 targets today, which is by far the most on the season. Thielen was second with only 6 targets. Mingo finished with 6 catches for 69 yards. He now has back-to-back games with at least 60 yards receiving as well, and he's seen 29 targets over his last 4 games. His ceiling will be capped with just how bad this offense is, though. But they do have decent matchups the rest of season with against the Saints, Falcons, Packers, and the Jags to close out the year. So Jonathan Mingo, limited ceiling, but if he's going to continue to see a really strong usage, then at least you could take a look at it because they're going to be playing from behind most every single game, so they're going to be in positive passing game scripts. So for guys like this, and then after that, I put Odell on here. He continues to be a part timer. He's only running around 50% of the routes, and but he is seeing a 17% target share. The Ravens will have plus passing game scripts the rest of the way against the Rams, Jags, 49ers, and Dolphins. So I think you could look at him. And then Khalil Shakur, since week 8, he has been running 70% of the routes, seeing a 14% target share. The Bills are pretty much fighting for their playoff lives right now and have some tough matchups against the Chiefs, Cowboys, Chargers, and Patriots. Patriots aren't a tough one, but to close out the year, 3 of these 4 games will be heavy passing game scripts. Shakir will have flex appeal moving forward, and then after that, we can talk about a few of these stash options here for this week. Jameson Williams is one. I kind of went back and forth about having him on as a ad, but he just isn't seeing the volume. Jameson Williams was only targeted one time for 11 yards, but he did have one carry for 19 yards and a touchdown. Ben Johnson, not sure if really what he meant when he said he wanted to get him more involved, but he did find the end zone today. Williams will be hard to trust unless they truly get him more involved. The Lions, though, will face the Bears, Broncos, Vikings, and Cowboys to end the season. And then Zay Jones, good offense, heavily involved in the red zone, limited with Calvin Ridley and Kirk, but he will remain a solid stash option attached to one of the hotter offenses over the last 2 to 3 weeks. Rashad Bateman, very similar to Odell Beckham, but he actually is a full-time player. He's only rostered in 4% of leagues. He hasn't really put it all together in 1 week yet, but he is running 76% of the routes and seeing an 18% target share over the last 4 games. Like I said, much like Beckham, I want pieces attached to this offense, especially with Mark Andrews out. Alec Pierce, Minshew spoke this week about wanting to get him more involved. That they did with him seeing 6 targets today. He held in 3 of them for 100 yards and a score. He has seen 12 targets over the last 2 games as well. And the Colts are one of the more fast-paced offense, which will lead to targets to go around. Obviously, Michael Pittman is the alpha and the omega of that offense. But I think Alec Pierce could be something you could look at, especially in deeper formats. Quentin Johnson, I went back and forth about putting him on here, honestly, but he was targeted 7 times. He hauled in 5 of them for 52 yards. He remains one of the biggest busts so far of this season. He continues to drop what could be huge gains. Had another just absolutely brutal drop today, and one that looked like he had a lot of space in front of him had he caught it. But the Chargers still have no other options outside of Keenan Allen to lean on in the passing game, which will allow him to have a decent amount of targets game to game. And we could see Joshua Palmer return over the next couple of weeks, but we haven't really heard much about that. We'll have to see on that. But he could be somebody you could look to stash as well that I have on here. Then the other guys on here as options, I think you can look at like a Darnell Mooney or, a Marvin Mims, Hunter Renfrow. But those are the kind of the guys you're looking at. But overall, Noah Brown and Elijah Moore, I think headline the guys I'd want to pick up.
We'll wrap it up with the Week 14 tight end streaming options. Going to kick it off with Isaiah Likely. He's going to lead off this list just because he's in the best offense of this group and someone you can just pick up and run out the rest of the season if needed. He did see 6 targets in the last game before they headed into their bye week. Chico Okonkwo showed up today, went 3 for 62 on 6 targets. He has quietly had at least 5 targets in 3 of his last 4. Going to get a matchup in Week 14 against Miami. They're middle of the road against tight ends. Tennessee should be trailing early and often in this one, so it could open up some more opportunities for Okonkwo. Tucker Craft has slid into the Luke Musgrave role. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's likely going to bury you, but at least he's out there running a bunch of routes and seeing a handful of targets each week. Gerald Everett, a little bit tougher to trust here with two of the tight ends in the mix, but the Chargers do get a matchup against Denver, who have allowed the most half-point PPR points per game to the position heading into Week 13. So you could definitely do worse. And then Tyler Conklin, obviously this is a gross situation here, but he did see 9 targets today, which led the team. He was only able to turn that into 3 for 35, but is going to get a matchup against Houston in Week 14, and the Texans are allowing the second most half PPR points per game to the position. So like I said, Isaiah Likely is going to lead off that list, but there are some other options if Likely was held through the bye week.
Yeah, I mean, the big one I think for streaming this week would be because of Trey McBride being going. I mean, he had another monster day again today. I mean, he is heavily involved. But I think Brevin Jordan is another name you could look at too.
Yeah. The only reason why I didn't throw him on there just because I wasn't sure of the Dalton Schultz injury yet. So that's I'm glad you brought that up though. I didn't mean to mention that to pay attention to him and see what happens.
Yeah. Other than that, you have guys like Michael Mayer that maybe you could look at as an option. But just I think that's the one that makes the most sense. Other than that, but so let's see if we have any question here really quick. Zapata, what about adding Noah Brown? Yeah, absolutely. He is probably one of the best. If you're looking for a wide receiver, he is absolutely one of the best. And then I saw who's the cut for Pacheco. It's Jerick McKinnon. Jerick McKinnon isn't a long term thing. I think this is just more of they don't feel like they need him right now, and so that. But it's not CEH. You'd have to have an injury to Pacheco for CEH to become relevant for the Chiefs. So I'm not really all that concerned. I wouldn't put him on any list of as an option either because Pacheco, like we saw last week and really a lot tonight, he's handling the lion's share of the offense right now with McKinnon out. So McKinnon would be the guy that I would probably want if you were going to. So, anyways, that being said, I think nothing else in here. So hope everybody has a good rest of the night. And we'll be back again this week for all of our Week 14 ranks and all that stuff. And we'll go live again this week as well to answer all your questions. So hope everybody has a good week. One more week left till the fantasy playoffs. Let's end on a strong note, win some championships. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.